after you've done playing around with your picture and doing all sorts of crazy things to it, and you like what you've done, I will I go to File, and you go to Save As. I create a folder for the stuff that I'm doing, and then the stuff that I've just worked on, I'll just leave it. Well, I'll create a new folder. I usually put something like Done, so I know that these are the files that I've completed and I've finished. Right, right. Ready to flood everybody's email boxes. So I usually keep the file name because that'll help me in the future if I need to look back up the actual the raw image. And I'll save this as a TIFF file, which is a full resolution file. I'll put a T on the end because I know that that's a TIFF file.
What do you do for the profile? For the profile, the ICC profile, what do you usually do?
Oh, I use Adobe RGB. There's two different kinds of profiles, sRGB and Adobe RGB. They're called color spaces, and we could do a whole meetup on color spaces if you want. Preston, that'll really confuse you, because there's all sorts of graphs, overlapping graphs, and histograms and everything. So it'll be great. sRGB is generally a good color space for monitors, and Adobe RGB it's a wider color space, and it's good for printing and printers. If you do one or the other on one or the other devices, it's not going to make a huge difference. If you're really particular about the color, then you use the specific one. You could set your camera actually for either one. The cameras have two options, either sRGB or Adobe RGB. It kind of depends on what your final output is going to be. If most of what you're doing is on a computer screen, just leave it on sRGB. If you think you're going to make a lot of prints from what you're doing, Adobe RGB would be the best color space to start out with. So that's why I work mainly in Adobe RGB because I know that I'll be making prints from a lot of this material. A TIFF file is just a large file. It's the full resolution file. It's the same size of file as is open in Photoshop. If you I will save that. You can actually do a mild image compression that doesn't affect the quality. And if you've got a real large file, I know Preston's got the A7R2, which produces pretty big files. If you save a TIFF with no compression, it'll be whatever the size of the file that's open in Photoshop. The D800 produces a file that's 103 megabytes in size. And I think the A7R2 is about 120 megabytes in size. So that's going to be the size of the file in your computer. So that'll hog up a lot of space. The compression doesn't really compress it too much, but maybe a little bit. When you open up a picture in Photoshop, if you look to the very bottom corner of the big window that's open up, you'll see some numbers here. It'll say doc, and that'll be the size of the file, the open file in Photoshop. So there's a couple of different things. There's the size of the file that's in that your camera produces, that it writes to the camera disk, which is often not real big. It might be a raw file for some of the newer cameras, might be anywhere from 15 to 20 or 25 megabytes in size. There's a compression that goes on in the camera that doesn't affect the quality of the pictures for the raw files. And some of them are actually closer to 30 megs in size now. And then there's the actual full-size file, which is when you completely open it up, either in Lightroom or in Photoshop, can be quite large. In this example, it's 108 megabytes in size, 103 megabytes in size. So that's a pretty big file. I create the TIFF file because that becomes my master file. That's the file that I made the picture as like I want it, as good as I want it. And so now I have a full resolution file that then I could change. I could either change the size, I could crop it, I could save it as a smaller JPEG. If you save it as a JPEG right away, you've already lost information and you've already lost some quality. So if you save an initial file as a TIFF, you could always go back to that, and it'll always be that same high quality that you worked on in your image processing. Once you save it, you can now go to image size.
But what's the compression that you use without losing any information?
What's the, I'm sorry?
You said there's a way to save your compressed file without losing any information, but which option was that?
Oh, that's if you save a TIFF file. I'll show you the. It'll look like this when you're doing it, and then once you hit save, oops, let me change the name so you'll get this window, and it'll just say TIFF options. It'll say image compression. The default is none, so it'll look like that. LZW apparently is probably one of the better ones. It doesn't compress it a huge amount. Like this file will probably become about an 80 meg file, so it's still pretty huge, but it compresses it a little bit. But that doesn't. It's just called a lossless compression, so it won't lose any kind of quality to it. If I go straight to the printer, I'll usually save it at none. Okay. It kind of depends on who I'm using, and because the printer that I use, I can upload pretty large files to their FTP site, and so I've done 100 meg files, and they don't seem to complain at all. So because I think a lot of people are doing it, so they've got a pretty big server, so I think it doesn't matter. But you could save a little bit of space on your hard drive or in storage by doing the image compression that way. If you're going to save it as a JPEG, though, don't save the whole file, because if you're going to compress it, you might as well be able to compress it to a small enough thing where you can easily send it, upload it, and if people need to download it, it's not going to take forever to download. You can go to image size, and it'll read out in the default is pixels, so it'll read out in pixels. This is the physically large, the actual physical size of the picture, where at a resolution of 300 pixels per inch, the width is 24.533 inches, and the height is 16.373 inches. So it'll make a 16 by 24 inch print without any loss in quality. Although with digital prints, the size apparently just doesn't matter anymore, just the way the software works. So don't ask me to explain that, because that was explained to me by printers, and so since they're making the prints, I trust them. If you keep this on pixels, you could when I send stuff on the Google groups if I put it into the Google Docs, I might set this at about a 3,000 pixel width, because as you can see, it'll resize it, and there's not a huge, I mean, you'd have to blow this up pretty big to find any kind of change in quality. And especially if you're looking on a computer screen, it's not going to look any different really than the full resolution picture that I just I changed the image size on this. So this is sort of, it's physically, in terms of the computer memory, a lot smaller. It started out at 103 megs. It's now a little bit over 17 megs. So it's a much smaller picture. And if you go to save as, now I could save this as a JPEG and put this on the, and post this. I go down to JPEG. So file name, I'll just put J on the end of that one. Save as JPEG right there. You click on save. Another box will open that says JPEG options, and it'll give you the quality. I have it set at 8, which is the quality of high, and it'll give you a preview of the actual size that it's going to be at, and that says 1.6. Is that right? Yeah, 1.6 megs. So that'll be 1.6. You could change that. Say you only want to send a 1 meg file. you change that to quality of 7, which is considered medium, and it's 1.1. So as long as it's 7 or 8, it's in the medium to high range, then it's not going to really change enough information where it'll look horrible on a computer screen. It'll look perfectly good on the computer screen. So you could actually go down to maybe 1,500 to 2,000 pixels wide on the longest side of the picture. And your picture, that's about the most resolution of any computer screen anyway.
We're sending our shots around to people in the Astro email here. That's pretty good. Just 1 megabyte. Maybe.
A 1 meg file at about 2,000, 3,000 pixels wide is perfectly good. Chuck.
Would you show where to do the image size again?
Okay, you go up to image on the menu,
Yeah.
and that gives you a pull down
There it is.
thing. And it's actually the same one.
Yeah.
To do the adjustments, you go to adjustments and you get another pull down menu. You go down to image size, and then you get this box, and then you could just change the different parameters. You change the width or the height depending on if you're working with a horizontal or vertical picture. You keep the there's this little link here. You can actually eliminate that, but you don't want to. You want to keep that because what that does, it keeps what's called the aspect ratio. If I change the width there, it'll also change the height at the same time, so that you don't get a strange-looking shaped picture. Because it'll, if you just change the width and the height doesn't change, it starts to distort the picture. And then the resolution is whatever it comes up as. You don't really have to deal too much with that. And then you just hit OK. I think there's nothing else that you really need to deal too much with in terms of the image size for the most part. You could before you save it as a JPEG, you can add a watermark if you want to do that, and then I have in my, let's see, blizzard of folders here. I've got a folder that has watermarks in it, so I could just open up basically a blank page that I select everything. I could copy that page and then paste it onto this page, and there's my watermark. I select lighten because it'll just choose whatever the lightest things are on the file that you pasted, and the black disappears. I could go to under edit. There's something called transform. Well, free transform is easier, and it'll select. This is actually the file that I just pasted on. So it'll select the parameters of that file. You could put your mouse anywhere inside the square, the rectangle. You hold it down, and you can move it around anywhere you want. So I could put my name anywhere I want, and then I could also, by holding the Shift key down and up in one of the corners, I could make it bigger or smaller. So then I just double click, and it'll lock it in place. And under opacity, I could change the opacity to very essentially very light or very thick, depending on how bright I want that. That creates 2 layers, though. So what you need to do before you save that as a JPEG is you need to go up to the layer part of the menu up here, which you get another giant pull-down menu. All the way almost to the very bottom is something called flatten image. And so that's what you need to do when you're doing layers as well. You click on flatten image. That'll what's created when you have layers is that you have imagine 2 pieces of paper on top of each other. Those are your 2 different layers. Flattening the images just brings those 2 layers together onto essentially one piece of paper. So I've done that. Now I could save that as a JPEG, and I could post it on the Astrophoto group, and we could flood everybody's email boxes with 20 or 25 different responses to them. Let's see. So what I'll do. Any questions about anything so far? Yeah. Yes.
What happens if you forget to flatten it before
if I forget to flatten, which here I'll demonstrate here, I'll go to Save As, and I want to save it as a JPEG, and down here it'll say Warning. And so that's sort of a key. Let's see. I wonder if I can actually say that. I think I'll save that. I think what happens is that it must, if you hit save, it must automatically flatten it for you. So I suppose you could do that. I make it a habit just so I know. I keep knowing where the flattening is. I just go to layers and then flatten it. But it has to be a flattened image in order to save as a JPEG. Gary, yes.
Sorry, I just came in.
Gary's in the house.
I have been using this mostly for doing start range composites.
Right.
So what I do is I choose all the layers and then say lighting. It's a blend mode. So it shows all the start rays and everything. And once I flatten the image becomes even brighter than what it was when I just did a blend mode as lighter. Like all the start rays and everything, they will show pretty bright compared to what they were as individual layers in a lightened mode. I don't know why that happens.
Yeah, Gary's question was about doing star trails and then making putting all the files into Photoshop into layers, and then he'll blend them using the lighten mode, and he says that the actual image becomes brighter than when you saw the brighter than the individual frames, or brighter than
brighter than the whole composite in the lighten mode.
Okay.
The start rays will look decently exposed, but then when I flatten them, it becomes, all the trails becomes super bright.
Okay, yeah. When he flattens them, then the trails themselves become very bright. I'm not sure what's going on. I'll look through that and see. We might have to do a separate meetup on that, but yeah, I'm not sure because I haven't seen that. You might just have to select the sky part and just add a little contrast or darken that slightly if it's too bright for you.
That's what I do. I do the quick selection.
Right.
The sky part, and then the curves, like I kind of make it a little bit less.
Right. Yeah, it's probably what you ultimately have to do.